In this video I am going to argue that correct proportions are less important than you might think while drawing. Especially when you want to improve your art, there might be reasons to actually deviate from what are so-called correct proportions. Furthermore, I would like to say that these videos are designed to listen to while drawing. You can see me drawing the things on the screen here in different proportions to show you that you don't actually have to adhere to the correct proportions for a drawing to look good. You can invent your own proportions. I hope you consider picking up your drawing tools so that you can join me. One additional thing before we continue with the rest of the video, I do have a newsletter where I send out an article every Sunday with drawing tips and also drawing exercises. I hope you will check it out. See the link in the description also. On to the rest of the video. When you are a beginner, you are really want to hold on to knowledge. You want to have information, you want to have a routine you can follow so that you can arrive at a correct drawing. And one of those things you typically gravitate to is the proportions of the human body. For example, you can see in the Loomis method, for example, you will see that a human is 7.5 heads high. You can approximate that with 8 heads high, and you can then divide the human body into 8 parts, and where the crotch arrives in the middle and the chest around where one head down. And typically a man has broader shoulders than a woman. So a man will typically have shoulders that are 3 heads wide, and a woman has shoulders that are 2 heads wide. And the problem with that is that you want to learn those things and you draw it that way. But if you do model drawing class, you will notice that we're all so very different. And actually what makes us different makes us unique and makes us interesting. And your drawings are way more interesting if you actually look at how much we differ from each other. If you start drawing things in one specific way, then you start to develop a mannerism. You might keep drawing people in the same proportions. Maybe you start drawing heads the same way, noses the same way, hands the same way. And one thing to remember is that we're all very different. And also our proportions are very different. I saw a photo once of an athlete, and he had such broad shoulders that his shoulders were 5 heads high. He had a relatively small head and really broad shoulders, and 5 heads high, whereas my shoulders are maybe 3 heads wide. And that is one of the things to remember. Also, children, for example, might only be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 heads high, whereas an adult may be 7.5 heads high. But so if you want to design a character, you might consider making it fewer heads high so that it has more childlike figure. But you can also go for a more of a mythical god, a sort of Greek god-like figure, where you can decide to make the head much smaller relative to the body. So maybe the body becomes 9 or 10 heads high, for example. Another thing to consider is that it is much easier to draw if you just let go of the proportions. If you want to have the proportions exactly right, then you notice it when it's slightly off. And it's especially for things like the corners of mouths or something. If that's slightly off, just a fraction of a millimeter, then you can really see it. Whereas if you just completely let go of correct proportions, like for example with a caricature, then it doesn't matter if you're a few millimeters off. It can still look good. The overall design can still be pleasant. This is mainly noticeable, for example, when you draw clouds. I mean, what is an accurate cloud? If you look at a cloud, maybe you make it slightly more puffier, etc. You can draw it freehand and make it look good. And also trees, what does it matter if a branch is slightly more tilted or slightly longer or shorter? It looks nice very quickly, and that makes it more fun to draw. At least for me, I do not like measuring a lot. That's less fun for me to draw that way. For me, it's more fun to just freehand draw with a pen. And for that, it's useful to draw things that you don't have to get as accurate. Another example is dragons. Dragons are just fun to draw, and that is because dragons don't exist. So if you draw the nose slightly too big or slightly too small, or the eyes slightly too big or the eyes slightly too small, who will notice? I mean, who knows what a dragon looks like? So you can play a bit with proportions and still have it look good. Plus, you have to consider that you're doing all of this to make a beautiful picture. It's an assumption that if you get the proportions right, then the picture will also be nice. But there you are defining it as you being a camera, making an exact copy of what you see. And that might not always be the case. It might be when you already have a camera, even in your mobile phone. But if you can deviate from reality, you can start to say something about the object you're looking at. For example, if you make a caricature, you can start to put something of the character of that person into the caricature, and then with that you can say something about that person. So by deviating from reality, by deviating from what is so-called correct proportions, you can, apart from it being more fun, apart from it being easier, you can also start to say something and try it that way. Also, if you do gesture drawing, you can exaggerate the pose. You can look at what the person is doing, look at the action line, and exaggerate that. And if you exaggerate it, you can be less precise and at the same time more expressive and say something about it. So it doesn't have to be exactly like a photo. You can actually deviate from it and get even better results, because that is the point I'm trying to drive home. The purpose is, of course, to arrive at a beautiful image. And for that, it is an assumption to think that you have to have correct proportions. But that is, of course, not the case. You can deviate from correct proportions a lot and actually get even nicer, more dynamic, more expressive drawings that way. What I do find that is important is that the forms are suggested correctly. What you can typically see if you put down a line is it suggests a certain form, and then if you add more lines, those lines should also suggest the same form. If different lines contradict each other, that will hurt your eyes. You will notice if you make an upper leg too long, that's fine, but all the lines that define the leg should all suggest the same form, the same underlying three-dimensional form, because then it becomes believable to the eye. Even though you deviated from reality, several lines in the drawing are all saying the same thing. They're all saying, no, this is the form here, yes, and the other line is saying, yes, this is the form. So as long as your drawing is internally consistent, as long as all the lines suggest the same form, your eye will believe it. And that is very important for it being pleasing to the eye. You can deviate from accurate, proper proportions, I guess, the correct proportions, whatever they are, because every human being is different. But as long as the underlying form is suggested consistently by all the lines in your drawing. I have several drawing exercises videos also here on YouTube, where you can see how to draw organic forms. I highly suggest you check them out also, because they're really also fun to do. So again, because organic forms allow you to deviate from any shape or form that is precisely measured. You can start with a ball and it has to be perfect sphere, but if you deform the ball, you can deviate from what is supposed to be a correct ball, and you can stretch it a bit more, or you can squeeze it a bit more, and you don't have to be as accurate, and it will still look very nice and very dynamic, and that makes it also a lot of fun to draw. And you can start by practicing or drawing organic forms before you continue to drawing exaggerated poses or exaggerated proportions to give more expression to the thing you are drawing. And lastly, I would again like to say that please do check out my newsletter. It goes out every Sunday. I send an article with some tips for artists and also some drawing exercises, because again, my purpose is to get you and me into our sketchbooks more often. I hope you'll also check out my other videos, and I hope you'll check out my newsletter. Thank you for watching and listening. Hope to see you soon. Bye bye.